Hi there. My name is Caesar Aguirre. I am the head instructor and dojo cho of Houston Aikido Foundation in Houston, Texas. Anyways, I wanted to post this video about sensei, about the instructor, because I realized that, I guess one of the silver linings or one of the things we realized during this whole pandemic situation is that we don't have a social media presence, right? Nothing on YouTube, nothing on Instagram. I mean, we have our videos that we post, right? But not enough, especially right now, we've got, plenty of students that are sitting at home, saying, hey, we need something, give me something, Um, they're just completely like, we need martial arts in our life. So until we can actually meet in person, I think it's good to start adding content, sharing. It's one of the big principles of Aikido, right? Is to provide and help and share with the community. So I think we are finally going to start building some good content on YouTube. Obviously, video is one of the best platforms, right? So we are going to start adding some content. And one of the first parts here that we're going to add is a section where I can talk directly out to anybody watching this video in terms of some insights and some more in-depth conversation about specific topics that a lot of people who practice martial arts or Aikido in general, this is usually the part where you sit down with your instructor or the students, for a lunch or a picnic or a get together, and this is where you usually learn about the people that you're training with. But because right now, because we're in coronavirus 2020, we aren't able to actually meet in person. So we want to start sharing this stuff and recording these things that we haven't done before. And yeah, so we're going to get started. So this very first one where I'm going to share with you is a little bit more about myself. Being the head instructor, being dojo cho. Dojo cho means basically the leader of the dojo. Um, that you each instructor or each person who starts their own studio or the dojo is obviously going to have and design their program, but also b the decoration and the culture that they're bringing. They're always going to design it in their own way, right? um, so I think to understand where that motivation comes from and what's the thinking behind it, I think is obviously really important. It's not just you coming in doing a technique and then you leave, right? Obviously, you come in, you do a technique, and you want to know where where you're coming from, right? As an instructor. So I think it's a really important part to understand where the thinking is coming from in terms of why I've set up the studio the way I am, why I'm doing the things I'm doing, and then what's the motivation behind it. And then once you find out, obviously, the motivation, it's why. What sprung that motivation? And so I'm kind of answer some very broad questions that are pretty common that I've experienced myself being in martial arts for just right at just right over 20 years now. Man, it's making me feel old now. But anyways, just right over 20 years, and understanding where we're coming from, why we do the things we do, what is our story, and how do we get to where we are, Um, and I'm assuming that, just kind of with the law of averages, that some people have a different experience, some people have a vastly different experience, and some people have a very similar experience. So I should probably preface by saying this is my story, right? This is how I've come to where I am today with my training in martial arts and my outlook on life in general, and how I got to where I am is going to be kind of this journey I've taken. And it's my journey, right? It's something that I've experienced myself. The things that have come to me and the things that I've put out into the world, these are kind of the interactions that are very uniquely your own story, right? So there could be some similarities and there could be some differences. So obviously, don't take this as a this is how it has to be or this is the only way. This is just my journey, what I've come to, and how I came to them. And then hopefully it shares a little bit of insight and maybe some clarity on why maybe you view something different or maybe you haven't viewed it the way I viewed it. And how does that contribute and how does that add to your training and then your journey in life? I think that's really the important part. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions, and then hopefully you get to know me a little bit better. We're obviously going to be adding more content. I've got a video I'm going to be uploading on a very easy martial arts virtual trainer that you could do at your house. So it's kind of like a workout along, and you can hit play. I'll have some music in the background, and you can literally just follow me as you go. You can do it in your house. You can pause and play it. You can rewind it. It's a great quick 30-minute session. It will keep your core base martial arts skills up to snuff while we're going through this pandemic. Schools can't open, everything like that. But still, I believe martial arts is very important. Martial arts for me changed my life, and changed my view on things. And it's very important that I think we keep that journey going and we find a way to make it work, right? Even the founder of Aikido, said that the spirit of Aikido is not contained in a building or in the uniform we wear or anything like that. It's the spirit of something, and you can find that spirit anywhere. It can be in the backyard. It can be in a Guayabera, something like that. So the idea is that, we're in this situation. It's really testing our philosophy, in our way of life and how can we adapt. I think that's one of the key core messages of the Aikido philosophy is adapting to what's in front of you. So anyways, we're going to go through a couple of questions. And if you have any more questions that you have yourself, obviously leave them in the comments. I will try to get to any questions that are out there. I would love to answer everything that I can. Maybe we have a follow-up session, maybe a live feed. We are going to be including a Patreon section here. If you want to help us continue and maintaining and building content, we would really, I would really appreciate any help that the community can provide, so we can keep Aikido going, we can keep the studio alive, and once we're back up with the coronavirus and everything going on, and once we're in a good position to reopen our schools and get people back in the doors, we are definitely going to be doing that. So any contribution you can do will help us keep going and kind of maintain our status. And then finally, once we're up and going, we can rock and roll really quickly. So anyway, so I'm going to go through a couple of very base questions of a get to know you that you probably see anywhere. So the first question is kind of like in my words is what's your story? So I have a long story, but I have a very interesting story that I think looking back on it, you kind of laugh at now. Because I started my journey in martial arts way back in the mid 90s. So this was me in middle school transitioning to high school. You can do the math and figure out the age on that one. But anyways, I actually I can give a lot of credit and thanks to a really close friend of mine named Ben. He actually got to know him in middle school and then through high school. But he was a really good friend. He lived in the neighborhood. We'd go hang out, and then I think at some point he kind of introduced me. He had been training in karate in a style that's a kind of a hybrid form of taekwondo and karate and judo. Um, and he introduced me to that and what he was doing. He wanted to show me what he was doing, and I was like, "This is cool, right?" And you grew up with things like Ninja Turtles and Karate Kid and all that stuff. Um, so I thought it was cool. Had my own experiences with dealing with obviously in middle school and everything like that, you're dealing with bullies. So, kind of got in my own, playground fights, after school fights, things like that. And if you know me in real life, I'm not a a tall person by any means, right? I'm like 5'4". But, back then, that definitely invited people to, basically try to test me. They go, oh, there's a short guy, there's a little guy, I can take him, so let me show, type of thing. So, I learned very quickly that I don't have the personality to submit. That's probably the best way I can learn. That was the best way I can say it in the full truth of it. But, I basically, once we got in those situations, you kind of see your reaction to things. And mine was always definitely to fight back, whether I was skilled at it or not, it didn't matter, right? My natural reaction was somebody hits me, I hit them back. And that that happened quite a bit. Got in my own trouble, everything like that, like typical male youth, and a little bit, getting in trouble in school and stuff like that. Get a little bit of rebelliousness, a little bit of um, challenge to authority, you could say. And I think looking back on it now, I think it's really more about somebody who's like me, who's just has a lot of energy, who has a lot of active brain power, and you're trying to find something to to focus on that, and who gets your attention. And I think a lot of times in school, especially, it was just like, I'm moving so fast and I'm trying to pick things up really easy that I just lose attention and I, basically find an avenue to get in trouble. But one of the things I really liked about martial art was that it helped me focus on something, right? And I think at the time, for me, it was, you know, a punching bag or a kicking pad or a sparring partner, right? So that was my first introduction to martial arts, was that kind of traditional karate, traditional taekwondo, learning to kick, learning to punch, learning to spar, kicking pads, all that stuff. Um, and then, I think right in the mid 90s, we got introduced to the UFC, right? You had the Gracies come out and just kick everybody's butt, and we were just all, you know, taken aback by that. And by then, we had, between middle school and high school and moving up to all that stuff, I'd already, kind of had my base training in karate and in taekwondo, kind of branching out and sparring with other people that I knew that were friends or not friends, people that were boxers or kickboxers or anything like that. Anybody who had any martial arts training, we were already out there. Me and, some friends, we were just out there like testing ourselves, right? It was kind of like it wasn't a wild west or anything like that. It wasn't like, we were in danger or anything like that. But we definitely were out there just trying whatever we could. So we would learn kicking and punching, right? And we'd buy pads, like, headgear and hand gear and foot gear. And anybody who was we were able to train with, we'd go out there. We didn't care what style they were. Like, we have a friend who was a kickboxer. We had a friend who was like a pure taekwondo guy. We had another style of karate. It was anybody. We would say, hey, let's give it a try. Like, it's a friendly match, etc. And I think back then it was definitely just a test of you know what you knew, and then if the other guy kind of beat you, and he was good, you would learn from them and go, hey man, that was a great technique. Like, that was really cool. Show me how you did it. So I think that idea of not being worried about who won and who lost was already embedded in me before I even got into Aikido. And that that comfortness in kind of colliding with people and feeling it out was definitely already getting cemented in me. Um, and then, you take your average teenage experience in high school and just like a ball of emotions and not understanding how to handle it, all that other stuff. I think what I really liked about martial art, especially as a teenager, and you do see a lot of kids going into martial arts, and then kind of getting out as an adult, and we'll talk about that later about how do we maintain that practice as you get older. Um, but it's definitely a great way of instilling discipline and those core values in a child, in a teenager or a younger child, when they're going through the toughest time in their life, right? Emotionally and developmentally and all that stuff. You're growing, right? And I think that great disciplined approach to it and having kind of structure around it, and it not being too like disciplinary, not like a militaristic style, even though it is kind of quasi-militaristic, but it's not boot camp, right? It's a very like a very not as hard discipline, right? It is discipline, but it's like here's your uniform, put it on, stand at attention, you know. Um, when you hear an order, you take it, right? Um, physical training, learning endurance, learning all that stuff. I mean, it's really at the core, it's very disciplined, but it's not like your instructor's going to yell at you if you do something wrong, right? They would say, no, do this, do that, get in line over here, um, you know, try to keep the talking down. So it's like, you know, coaching, but probably not as intense as like maybe your average Texas football coach or anything like that. And I think that was probably more agreeable for me at the time because I was obviously being in a rebellious stage. And so I think if I had somebody who was on the deep end of yelling at me when I'm doing something wrong, I probably wouldn't have accepted it as much. But I think the martial art teacher, the sensei, is that position is a really good one for any kids or any teenagers out there that are having trouble with authority, right? Having trouble with school, having trouble getting mental discipline, right? And being structured, but still being able to have a natural experience with other people and communicate and be positive with other people. I think martial art is a great avenue because that's what really happened to me, right? I was teenager dealing with all these different things, all the things that teenagers normally deal with, and then having being able to find martial art and have a little bit more of a structured, like a skeletal loose structure. It's not like it has to be like super sharp or anything like that, even though it could. But I think my approach was very much more of a relaxed approach to discipline, and something that was like it's kind of like I would say the difference between discipline and self-discipline. Discipline is when somebody is putting structure on you versus self-discipline where you're putting structure on yourself. And I think that's where I saw the great benefit martial arts provides to at that time it was a teenager, but even now I see that this provides a great structure for adults as well. A good mental structure to help you deal with stress, help you deal with confidence issues, anything like that. Being comfortable, talking and working with other people, things like that. So I think that even though those lessons began as a teenager, they've continued on as adults. And I think, learning how to bridge that gap is something as an instructor that we look at and go, how can we bridge the gap? What do kids and teens need to learn? And then what do adults need to learn? It could be different, but the concepts are still going to be the same. So, anyways, so yeah, so I learned, started martial arts as a teenager. Um, had some discipline issues, I would say, um, but rebellious, pushback, everything like that. martial art was the avenue for me to kind of learn when and how to push back, because obviously with a martial art instructor who can kick your ass, if you push back in the wrong way, they're going to kick you upside the head or, something like that. So you definitely learn this avenue of how can I challenge the instructor in a healthy way that's not going to get me in trouble and get my ass kicked. So, anyways, so I think that beginning was my very primal entrance into martial arts. And then I think, one of my heavy, was, so that was my friend who introduced me into karate taekwondo. And then he also, in terms of philosophy and just a wow factor, he also introduced me to Bruce Lee. Common story for people like in the 90s and earlier, 80s, 90s, and 70s probably, is he introduced me to Bruce Lee films. And that was, I would say, a page turner, but it was definitely, you see kind of the classic kung fu movies, and you're like, okay, that's cool. They're doing all these different styles and these movements and and then you go to Bruce Lee, and it's a totally different story, right? I mean, it's the same. You're seeing fighting and you're seeing a story, but the way this person is moving is like nobody else, right? And you're looking at him just going, bam, back fist, boom, punch, kick, with some style and flair, and you're just going, wow, this guy is incredible. His speed, his power, everything like that. And so, I think from a philosophical influence, Bruce Lee was and is my prime, motivator, my prime mentor. I mean, obviously he's passed away, but I totally just got immersed in his books in terms of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do and his philosophy in fighting and training, and all his other philosophical books and how he viewed all his other stuff. And that, to me, I think grounded the mental framework of how I'm living even today, is still how I use, how I think about things, even in an Aikido sense, um, but also how I viewed everything, going on at the training at that time. So I think two pathways really, helped me move myself into the direction of Aikido. Was a learning, from my friend Ben, who was actually doing the training, going with him and getting immersed into the actual, you know, meat and potatoes of martial art training. And then the other one is the philosophy, right? The philosophy of martial arts and the philosophy of different instructors was even more influential than the actual training itself. But obviously, you have to do both, right? And then my experience going in through high school was, cross training and sparring with other people that were outside of my own discipline, and just saying, hey, that was a cool technique. How do you do that? In taking that and just saying, hey, I'm going to add that to mine because that was good. So somebody who, like a kickboxer who had a incredible roundhouse kick and good boxing skills, I wanted to take that into my sparring, right? But then likewise, maybe we, the us guys who were training in karate, maybe we had a good front kick or a side kick, or maybe an elbow or something like that, or some type of takedown. The kickboxers and the boxing guys and the other discipline guys, they would say, hey, that was a cool technique, show me. So I think we're already in that collaborative, I wouldn't even call it mixed martial arts, but it was definitely proto mixed martial art, right? And then you have the UFC that happened, and you see that Brazilian Jiu Jitsu was just wiping the floor with everybody. So we immediately when we saw that, we were like, oh my God, takedown and ground defense and all that stuff. We need to learn that. So we did have a friend that was learning, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So we were totally just like, riffing off of it, not ripping or riffing. We're totally like stealing whatever we could from him. He would go to class, he would show us what he was doing, and then we would try to interpret it in our own way and go, okay, how can I use this? How can I use a takedown, or How can I use whatever technique that they were doing? How do I do side control? How do I do an arm bar? Really fundamental things like that. And realizing that there is this whole gamut of martial art that you need to know if you want to be good at martial art, right? It was, man, I need to learn kicking, I need to learn punching, takedowns, ground fighting, weapons, all that stuff. It was just like it opened your world to a bigger view. And that's kind of the the beginning stages of before I even got into Aikido. So I do apologize for this long story, but um, you know, um, that was basically my setup to get into Aikido. And then, looking for, a discipline that offered joint locks and throws and stuff like that, something that I wasn't familiar with, was my next step. And that's when I ran into my first and pretty much my prime teacher for most of my Aikido career. His name was Michael Black. And that's when I started Aikido, when I met him. And that leads me into the next question is, what got you into Aikido? And I think this really ties in kind of with the reason I was, explaining all this was, you know, I was already in the kind of like the phase of, we're learning the fundamentals of kicking and punching and taking down and martial arts, right? We're going out there, we're challenging people, we're testing them. We want, and we didn't think it was a, we didn't think it was in a negative, right? We were just like, hey, we want to challenge you, like, let's spar, let's see how good you are, type of thing. And I think we just viewed it as this is how you pay your dues in martial arts, right? Um, so we were just going out there and saying, whoever wants to spar with us, let's do it, you know, and a lot of times you can get your butt kicked. A lot of times you could kick somebody's butt, and I think you know, um, it all kind of balanced out in the end, right? You have as many wins as you do losses, and then as you get better, maybe you have a little bit more, but maybe you've passed it up, and now you're moving into coaching or teaching, or maybe you're moving into self defense. So it just things kind of grow. But anyways, I think what at that time, I think what really drew me to Aikido was also kind of a personal thing, right? I was going through kind of a very tumultuous relationship in high school, right? So a classic teenager, heartbreak and all this other stuff, and not being able to kind of let go of, or kind of deal with, these circumstances. And I think it really like dialed up my aggression when I was going out there and training and sparring and fighting and all this other stuff. So it just really amped everything up, like I had something to prove. And it was a really good timing because I met my first Aikido instructor, and he kind of saw that right off the bat. And we have a really funny story about this because he's kind of before, like way back in the day. He used to kind of introduce me because, obviously I became a student, but, he kind of introduced me as like, hey, this is Caesar. He was one of my first students, and he came in with his thug friends. And, people kind of look at that and go, hey, that's, Caesar's a nice guy. He's not a thug. And I always have to answer like, no, 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 it's true. Like, we were out there, we were, like I said, our challenge and our wanting to fight other people was dialed up, and I had a lot of angst and aggression to deal with. And we went into, this Aikido studio thinking it's just like any other martial art where you can spar, you put some pads on you, and you figure it out. And then we went in there, and I think what really drew me into Aikido was this, that the philosophy and the way of martial arts is dialed up, right? Because it's not just about the technique, it's also about the philosophy, right? And there's a spiritual component and a way of thinking component. And that was, and honestly, that was probably new to me because I think when you go to other martial arts, like a normal martial art, you're learning the techniques first, right? And you're going to learn the techniques and the discipline and the physical way first for a while, and it's probably not going to be till you're a black belt or a second degree black belt or third degree black belt where you finally move into the philosophy and the deeper meaning behind it. And I think what really stood out with Aikido was you're learning this deeper meaning and this deeper philosophy on day one, right? And my instructor really drew that out. And I think, one of the questions he challenged us with was about who are we really fighting? Who are we really fighting? And I think that was a question that just blew me out of the water because where I was at the time. I was very much challenging and fighting other people. And I think, my instructor, my first Aikido instructor, Michael Black, he was the one to challenge that thinking and to go, who are you really fighting? Are you really out there fighting other people, or are you fighting yourself? And that really made me take a step back. And I think there's actually a phrase, right? That he used to say all the time. He probably still says it. It's Masakatsu Agatsu, right? True victory is the victory over oneself. And I think I had never heard of that. I never heard that in any of the training that I did. I mean, maybe the instructors did believe that, but maybe it was saved for other students, and maybe it was for adults. Maybe they thought whatever their motivation was, in terms of my personal experience. I never heard that. I never heard that in karate or taekwondo or any of my sparring sessions or anything like that, right? For those, it was about towing the line, getting into the culture of discipline and doing the training and putting the work and going out and sparring and still holding those regimented ways, and the philosophy came afterwards, right? But once I came into Aikido, it was like that was the prime thing. It was like, hey, these structures and this discipline is needed, but you need to think. And that was something that I had not experienced in other martial arts at that time. Um, Besides Bruce Lee, right? Bruce Lee was heavily into the philosophy, but it seemed like everybody else who was practicing was like this was more of like a secondary thing. Like, hey, you learn to fight first, and then we're gonna have a philosophy talk later, maybe. But here it was like right in the forefront. It was, why are you training? What's motivating you? What's motivating your action, your intention, right? Are you doing the technique because you are giving your partner time to practice, or are you doing it because you're trying to beat some type of inner demon, right? And I think that's what really spoke to the truth to me, was like, holy cow, uh, this is my inner demon that I'm battling right now, um, and I need to start focusing on that one. So I think Aikido came at the right time. It was right in the middle of high school for me, dealing with all that tumultuous stuff, finally getting some deeper answers to what I was struggling with, and the internal monologue and the internal fight that I was having, and being able to sort the answers out to that. And from there I just went into college, um, doing Aikido and maintaining that practice. We went to Chicago to live in the studio and train with some great masters in the martial arts and Aikido. Came out of that, came out of college, tried to do some full time martial art instruction at the time, had my own studio as well. Um, Things didn't work out, the economy tanked, so I had to get a regular full time job. Went into a doctoral program at Texas A&M, continuing to do Aikido there. Came back to the Houston area, and this is where I've been for that 10 years now, in the downtown area of Houston, and obviously still maintaining my training, keeping a program going, offering Aikido to the downtown area. And now we've actually, luckily, before the whole coronavirus thing hit, we shifted into a home studio, and we've been doing that for about a year now, and we love it, right? Me, myself, and the students, we love it. We roll out the mats, we have a showman, we have training pads, we have everything we need, and it feels like home. So who knows what the next step is going to bring? I think we do have some goals, some future items we want to hit, but one thing at a time, and let's see where we go from here. But that's kind of where I went. I kind of summarized the the bigger 15 years of that. After that, I kind of summarized very quickly, but but suffice to say that that was really my beginning, my you know fertilizer for why Aikido and why martial arts really impacted me, and why I feel they're very important. But also, talking about those experiences, about why, if you train with us, if you see any of my training material, I'm very adaptive. I add elements of other martial arts into our training, and I find where it fits with Aikido. And, that for me explains that background, explains why I do that, what's my motivation. So if you see that, if you see me adding some boxing elements, some kicking, some takedown stuff, changing a little bit here and there, it's only because of that background of those experiences I had, where we were putting pads on and we were fighting, or maybe I did get into a real life situation, and what came of that, what influenced me to go, let's think about this in a different way. That has really impacted my Aikido, and but it's also kept me, here and thinking through how and where I want my Aikido to go in the future. Which leads me to my next question: what has made you stay in Aikido? And I think the prime, well, I'm going to say the prime. There's a lot of things that make me stay in Aikido. I think first and foremost, the philosophy of Aikido. Aikido meaning the way of harmony, very generally speaking. I think the way of harmony really speaks to me from teenager to now. I think as a teenager, you're dealing with a lot of tumultuousness, aggression, bad relationships, um, trying to get through high school, bullies. You're dealing with all this chaos, and I think the way of harmony was a good philosophy for me to view the world in a different way, and say, hey, you don't have to view this as chaos, and you're just trying to survive out of it, right? You can make sense out of it. You can, there's an exercise in Aikido called Randori, which means seizing chaos. So you can seize the chaos. You can control the things that you can control, and you can create a harmony in life, right? You can create a harmony with your teachers and with your friends and with your parents. And I think once I agreed with that, it totally changed my relationship and my experience in high school, right? It was like, hey, instead of fighting with these people, why don't I try to get along with them, right? Try to kind of kind of give to get type of thing. Like, if I give them what they need, will they give me what I need? And obviously the answer was yes. I mean, if I, you know, very generally speaking, it's like, hey, if I provide good grades to my parents, and I provide some good engagements to my teachers, they're going to give back, right? They're going to say, good job. They're going to say, here's some privileges, here, take the car and drive where you want to, type of thing. So it was kind of like learning, like, oh, I could, if I give, I can get a little bit, there's a mutual win-win here. And I think the way of harmony made me really think about that in a different way. Instead of trying to fight for everything, it was like, hey, why can't we learn to kind of get along and find common goals, and let's move forward that way. And I think that really changed the way I look at things. Um, and even today, you forward to today, and you realize that that philosophy, the way of harmony, the way to work and get along with other people, is probably more important than learning how to fight with other people. And even though I think, from my experience with fighting and learning to be in those situations, sometimes you will have to push back and sometimes you will have to fight. But I would say for the most part, for 90%, 95% of our lives, you're really trying to learn how to get along with people and how to cooperate, right? So I think that way of harmony really comes in handy now as an adult, in the professional world. I'm not looking to fight with my coworkers or my boss or my customers or anything like that, right? We're all learning, right? We're learning on how to get along with people and how to kind of find the win-win, right? Um, the mutually beneficial. And, that wouldn't be possible if I was, in the pure mindset of a fighter, pure mindset of aggression, that I'm going to use all the tools in my bag to beat you. I think if I were to carry that philosophy into my relationships, my family, my profession, that would just not work, right? I would be totally isolated, nobody would want to be around me. So I think learning to cooperate, learning to do all that, viewing your mat and your training time as like your simulation on how to deal peacefully with somebody's aggression, becomes even more important. And so the more I've done Aikido, the more I like it. And especially now that I'm kind of in that phase of comfortness where I'm adding elements that I want to, and redesigning the curriculum to kind of line up with how I view the process of how martial arts should go in general, and thinking about my own experience, right? So, thinking about, that learning the physical aspect of self-defense and dealing with aggression and pushback, and giving a little push and shove and having to fight a little bit for what you want. I think it's a great first stage to get through. And then finally getting through the second stage of Aikido, or a martial art training, is a cooperative training where you're not trying to hurt your your practice partner, but you're learning to do the techniques, and you're learning to execute them in the way that is effective, but also not more than you're not adding more power or hurt or pain than needed, right? You're just doing what you need to do to get the job done, so to speak. So you're learning to be efficient, so you're learning to be smoother. You're learning timing a little bit more. All these elements that we learn in Aikido. Um, I think that's a really important aspect in not just fighting, but in art. Working with another partner, but also just in life in general, right? You think about, like I said, you think about your own personal relationships, your own work, professional life, your family and friends. There's a timing to things, right? There's an energy to things. There's a distance. There's a gap to things. So I think, when I look at the general principles of Aikido, and I think about, from a technical point, what makes Aikido good? What are the key points to a good technique, right? My one of my instructors used to say that the kind of the three ingredients to Aikido were energy, space, and time. So how much energy you put in, how much space is in between you, and the timing of when you do what you do. All those three elements make up a good technique if you get them right. And I think about life in general, and I go, that's probably true in life, how much energy I put into something, the timing at which I decide to do something, and then the distance or the lack thereof, the spacing, that's so much right there, So I think learning as I'm doing Aikido, I'm kind of unraveling or peeling off the layers. And before it was just a physical technique; it was just martial art and me learning, joint locks and stuff like that. And then it gets into a deeper mindset about who am I really fighting? Is it myself, or is it really the person out there that I have to beat, and crush and beat them so they don't hurt me? Or is it just me and you know looking at things in a different way? And I think was really the second thing, right? The fighting thing was, not to say it was easy. It's not like I'm a MMA fighter or anything like that. But the fight is a very short path. But this understanding who I am and why I do the things I do, it's a lifetime, right? It's a lifetime training that you have to go through. And sometimes the answers have to repeat. Sometimes you do, so you find new answers, and sometimes you see the same thing and you see it in a very different way. So I think there's so much to learn. And then I think especially now that I have my own studio and I have my own curriculum, and I'm finding ways to put in what I want to see in somebody's basic training, that I am seeing, results in the people who train and the students. I am seeing some great results, and going, okay, that was, that idea was a good idea, so let's keep doing that. And then, or I see this other thing and go, "Oh, you know what, this idea, this was there, this wasn't a good idea. So maybe it wasn't needed, or maybe it wasn't needed as much, so maybe kind of that idea of energy. Maybe I don't need to focus on it, but maybe I just need to dial it back. Let's show, rudimentary, this is how you do something. Once you get it, once you can demonstrate it, let's move on, you know. So um, I think that really kind of leads into the next question, is what I like about teaching. And I think for me, one of the big motivations to teach is obviously to pass on the martial art of Aikido, the philosophy itself, but also, kind of, I wouldn't say legacy, but it's definitely this idea of sharing the knowledge that I've experienced myself, you know, my own personal experiences, but also the training in, developing students' own personal experiences with martial arts, and, finding their own pathway. I think that has been a motivation for me, is kind of a myriad thing. It's like you want them to kind of have a base layer of your own personal experience, right? Like, for me, in our curriculum, we have obviously core Aikido, but we also have elements of kicking and punching. We have, learning to take down and do ground defense, and learning how to, deal with somebody on the ground and hold them on the ground. And obviously, we have an element of dealing with resistance, some very kind of, specific ways of specific ways of resistance and how to deal with them. And so we've added those elements into our Aikido training, which is not common. Most Aikido instructors, Aikido curriculums, and the average is going to teach somebody a basic technique, very little resistance, and then maybe later on, once they've gotten a little bit better, they're going to add a little bit more resistance once you're a brown belt or a black belt or anything like that. Mine, I've kind of flipped it and I've said, hey, I want you to do a very core technique. It's not going to be fancy. It's going to be very basic, but you can execute it when somebody's resisting you. And so demonstrate that ability first. Do a basic, quick move and technique. A very basically like a 1-2 step movement, like total movements, but executing a core technique. Like an elbow lock in Ikkyo or a kotegaishi or something like that. How can you execute it in the most simplistic way while somebody's resisting you? And then once you can demonstrate that, then okay, let's talk about the avenues and pathways of movement after that. Once you've gotten that feeling for how it really is going to happen if somebody's resisting you and you're going to try to do your technique, it's going to be very simple movements. Maybe you're going to have to add a strike or two. So you kind of know that reality of, it's going to be a little harder than I think, than it's going to be a little bit harder than it is in training. And I'm going to have to earn it. I'm going to have to fight for it, right? But then after that, it's okay to say, hey, you figured out the core element of this one technique, right? Of kotegaishi or ikkyo, right? Elbow pin. Um, Once you've understood the basic core tenet of that, then let's try opening it up a little bit. Let's try some movement. Let's try some different movements. Let's try moving it. Maybe we're going around in a circle, or maybe we're kind of moving on an off angle and then doing the technique, or maybe we're gonna, do the technique, come under it, and then unravel it and do another technique. So we're learning some more technical Aikido, and starting off with some basic Aikido. Aikido that you can actually work with in a resisting a person, or somebody who's swinging, wild punches. Maybe a boxer who's going bah, 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 swinging punches, right? A guy who's not going to just punch and stick his arm out. So maybe you're dealing with that first, in terms of me learning how to move around and boom, find the technique that I need to. Very simplistic, very core Aikido. And then once you understand how to execute it from a raw, kind of direct, instinctual way, then okay, let's expand on that idea. Now that you got the core concept of Kotegaishi or of Ikkyo, right, or of Kokunage, right, or Iriminage, once you have the core concept of what that technique is trying to do, then okay, let's add some variation. Let's add some movement, so you understand how to set it up with a cooperative partner, right? So it changes the element, but I think for me, having that stair step of core martial arts and then adding the layer of the art of Aikido on top of that, to me is the better, not better, the for me it'd be more ideal to learn that way, because for me it's obviously my own experiences. That's the way I learned it, right? I learned core martial arts first, kicking, punching, quick takedown, quick wrist lock, quick arm lock, boom, just something real quick, take somebody down. And then I learned more in-depth technical Aikido where I can redirect somebody, where I can kind of Henkawaza, I can change the technique, or an Oyowaza, I can apply that same technique in a more advanced way, et cetera, et cetera. But I still learned that core concept of timing and distance, and control, controlling the other person. Once you get into an entanglement, once you engage somebody and they're not going to cooperate with you, it changes your entire strategy. And I think that's what I think from our training perspective, designing that curriculum that way helps us understand how to do Aikido when somebody's not cooperating, right? Learn that first. Do some basic, simple Aikido, and understand the core principle of it. And then once you've kind of gone out of that stage gate, then we can move into more technical Aikido, more variations, but working with a partner that's going to let you kind of do those variants, without too much resistance yet, but still kind of building on that idea that these are techniques you can do if somebody's resisting, and these are not. And it didn't just come out of nowhere, right? We looked at all these techniques and we said, okay, resist, grab my wrist and just pull really hard, or grab my wrist and take me down to the ground, and then see if we can execute a technique while the attacker's doing that. And some techniques to say, hey, we can't do that. It's a little bit long-winded, um, or in general, we can't execute that. Or maybe, like I said, maybe a technique is long-winded, but if I shorten it up, I can get to it. So it was this whole trial and error of looking at these things, and then now, as a teacher, I can, put these all into like a curriculum and share that with other people, and I can see their own progress of, and their own confidence of dealing with somebody who, I think actually for our blue belt test, obviously they're doing the normal techniques, but then also we have, kind of our own addition is to have, an attacker put gloves on and just go at them, right? And the attacker can do some boxing combinations. They can take them down to the ground. They can kick. They can tackle. They can, grab and choke. They can do any technique they want to. And I think for an Aikido person, we would call that, Jiuwaza, right? Free technique, or we would call maybe Randori, right? Just anything goes. And being able to see my students go through that and find a technique and kind of deal with the chaos and deal with the flurry, and being able to hold their own. Maybe it's not an Aikido technique, but sometimes it could be, and leaving it open to that and saying this is not about you showing, a specific technique. This is about you being comfortable in your own skin and being able to kind of survive a situation like that, right? Where somebody's just throwing anything at you and you don't know what it's going to be, but you can control the situation, you can control the person, and you can execute a technique, whatever, whichever one comes to you. And I think that's the one of the things that overlap between, kind of a traditional martial art training and Aikido is, maybe in a Aikido randori, something's going to come out that you weren't expecting. And same thing, if you're a sparring session, you don't know what's going to happen. So you've got to be able to adapt to the situation. Don't be stuck on, you know, how it looks in form or how it works when you're dealing with a partner in class. It could be different or it could be the same, and you don't know how it's going to go. So you've got to go in there, be comfortable with your own skin, be patient, be calm, all that stuff. And I look at the Aikido philosophy, and that's core prime, dealt with, being able to deal with those situations is stay calm, stay relaxed, be fluid, move with the people, move with the what's happening at you. And for me, it's about not being stuck to a specific pattern, to a specific form, but keeping the philosophy in mind, right? Be calm, be be fluid, right? Don't be aggressive, blend with the blend with what's happening to you, and then let's find a peaceful solution through that. And I've seen my students do this with, like I said, we put gloves on for a blue belt, and it's literally somebody just swinging punches and kicking and taking you down and trying to choke and all this other stuff. They're doing anything. And seeing my students deal with this, dealing with their own anxiety, dealing with their own aggression, and being calm and controlling the situation, that to me, that's what Aikido is about. And for me to see somebody else have that confidence in themselves, um, and deal with a situation like that as an instructor, that's everything to me. So I love that and I love getting to know my students, training with them day in and day out, and learning who these people are. It's really a prime motivation for me. So, anyways, I drag on a lot, and that actually kind of answered my next question: is what kind of training program do you have? And like I said, the core fundamentals for me is, white belt to blue belt should be core fundamental martial arts, primarily Aikido, but also learning kicking and punching, learning takedowns, learning how to deal with the ground comfortably, and then learning how to deal with resistance a little bit, learning about core Aikido techniques, core striking, core ground defense, core ground game, and then the culmination for me, in my opinion, in my curriculum is white belt to blue belt. That's about a 2-year path. And so you have 2 years to learn those core techniques, core skills in Aikido, very core, raw, essential techniques, core, essential striking and, boxing and kicking, ground defense, how to take somebody down, how to deal with somebody taking you down, the ground game, how to deal with somebody who's trying to hold you down and holding somebody else down. So we have these very raw skills, putting it all together at the blue belt stage where you are having to demonstrate having to demonstrate those skills, putting gloves on somebody, some boxing gloves and some pads, and just saying, hey, they're going to come at you, striking, kicking, takedown, choking. They're going to do anything they can. And what I want you to do is use your techniques, right? Use your strategies and try to control this person. And we've seen it to some great extent, right? We've done it with both male and female. We've done it with people who are big and strong, and we've done it with somebody who's like like rail thin, right? Who has um, who's not a strong person at all, but being able to see them do these techniques and execute them and control a situation, and it's a very simulated base situation. It's not like none of our students are trained MMA fighters. They're not trying to kill you, but they're trying to swing punches at you, right? They're trying to give you a simulation of what's going to feel like when somebody's just coming at you with a flurry of attacks and they have a strategy and they have an aim and how are you going to deal with that situation? And I think for me, my philosophy, and I kind of stole this from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, specifically the Gracie family, because they do this with their white belt to blue belts, is dealing with a self-defense situation. I think for me, Aikido could totally do the same thing and just say, hey, let's learn core Aikido. Let's learn some core defensive skills, we would probably call it. Blue belt is the culmination of that. You know, show me that you can protect yourself and defend yourself in a simulated situation, and then that's blue belt, right? That's fundamental martial arts. And then from there, we could say, hey, you passed this stage gate, right? You've learned how to defend yourself. Now, what you need to do for the rest of your life is just maintain those skills. And then on top of that, we're going to learn some more in-depth technical Aikido, right? Learning variation of movements, learning variation of techniques, you know, like I said, it's just there's so many pathways. If anybody's, obviously, if anybody's doing Aikido out there, there's so many pathways to movement, that you don't want to be fixed to one thing, right? You don't want to say, hey, these are the three ways you can move, and that's the only way you move. You just want to say, hey, this is the base way of how to execute the technique, and then we're going to show you a couple of different ways you could execute it in various ways. Now, these aren't the only ways. We're just giving you some base. We're just giving you some pathways to find and feel the avenues of movement, and then from there, I think that's my personal philosophy is, start with self-defense, start with base prime skills, and then build on that. Build an art, right? Build a way of movement. Build a way of thinking from that, and that's really my philosophy with Aikido, right? For me, it's core at the core is prime martial arts. Base budo, you would say, right? Striking, takedown, basic kotegaeshi, basic ikkyo, basic nikyo, things like that. Executing it in the most simplistic, effective way. And then, once you've demonstrated your ability to execute these things in a self-defense situation, to me, I think that's the core in any martial art is, can you use these in a self-defense way? And I think we do, in Aikido, have to answer that question. There was some root, there was you know some base beginnings in self-defense. So can we keep that, and can we grow out of that? Can we grow into more than that? And I think that's where Aikido really shines, is adding an extra level above that and saying, hey, there's more to life than just self-defense. There's an art, there's a way of thinking, there's a way of looking at other people. But I think you really need that prime core martial arts skills to build on. And so once you get that's my teaching methodology. Once you get through that gate of learning to defend yourself and feeling comfortable and confident that you can execute these things, then, okay, let's focus on the art of mastering Aikido, right? The pathways of movements, um, you know, breathing, posture, everything like that. But if you think about it, all these things you actually really need in self-defense, right? You need to learn how to breathe. You need to learn to keep your posture. You need to learn to keep your calm. But instead of, overemphasizing it, you're going to do that naturally. So, build those natural, disciplined martial arts skills. And then once you get into the blue belt level of learning more technical Aikido, then we can say, hey, all these things, breathing, relaxed, um, maintain focus, these are core principles into Aikido. So I think my own personal philosophy is use the martial arts, use the push and the tension, and the discipline of martial arts in general to introduce people to the concept of Aikido. Because I think once you have that core understanding of where the root of martial arts began, then you can understand where Aikido is coming from, because it really builds on core martial arts. It totally builds on Budo, or really it builds on Bushido, right? The way of the warrior. So these are just, you know, evolved techniques from the way of the warrior. And so we really have to understand why, and we have to make sure we maintain those roots, right? Because if we lose it, we're going to lose the mindset of where we should be going. So, anyways, long-winded, but I just wanted to say that that's really how I view it and how I've designed my curriculum is to focus on core martial arts, being able to defend yourself, white belt to blue belt. That's really what you're going to focus on is core prime techniques, things that you can execute when somebody's swinging a bunch of attacks at you, or somebody's grabbing you and resisting you, or somebody's choking you. How do you deal with a situation like that? It's going to be a very simple, direct technique, and then once you've gone through that, then let's go into the art of Aikido because that one has a lot more depth to it. But you still need this. You still need to go through and not prove yourself, but you need to go through the fire, right? You need to forge your own character, forge your own mindset, and then you'll be ready for Aikido, right? So, anyways, that's how I view things. So, um, I've got a couple more questions I'm going to answer because I do get these questions a lot. We're running on an hour, so hopefully you're still listening. Maybe you're listening to this while you're running or something like that. Hopefully it entertains you. But it's a lot of talking. But hopefully I only have to do this once, and but I'll probably do follow up. But anyways, the last two questions is: do you train in any other martial art? And I think this is actually, if you've been listening to any of my background or any of my personal philosophies on training, I think cross training is an absolute necessary for any martial artist, no matter what martial art you're doing, whether it's Aikido, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, boxing. I think everybody now knows after UFC is that not there's no one art that's perfect, right? Every art has a focus. And that means also that they're going to be really good at that focus, but it also means they're not going to be so good at these other things. And I think it's totally within the martial art way, the martial way to admit, how should I say this? Admit your openings, right? Admit your weaknesses to say, yeah, this one thing I'm not so good at. I'm working on it. I'm going to keep working on it because I know I need to round myself out as the best way I can. But it's not my best and it's not my favorite. But so I'm maybe I'm not going to focus on it, but I am going to keep practicing and making sure I know my basics on that one, right? But I think cross training is really important. So I would always say, in my opinion, is to obviously start with a prime martial art that you like. For me, it's Aikido. I just like the structure. I like the philosophy, and I like the pathways that it gives you more options as you get into the training. There's more optionality. Um, you can add different pieces to it, like like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or like Filipino martial arts or karate. You can really plug and play anything with Aikido and adapt it. So I like that as my prime martial art. And then in truth, I mean, if you listen to any of my background, I'm just a general, I love martial arts. I love the different ways of movement, the different mindsets, the different people that are in it. And I think it's just my own personality from my background with being a teenager. I love pushback. I love getting into those engagements. So I don't feel hesitant to jump into a conflict. And so I think I just love seeing different ways to deal with conflict, right? So I love practicing karate. I love practicing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love boxing. I love all this stuff. Capoeira, like I love that movement of like a dance fighting. So I am I call it my evergreen a lifetime student of martial art. I'm always going to be learning new things, new ways of movement. I'm always going to be a beginner in that sense, right? And I think in terms of my pathway of Aikido, I've been doing it for 20 years now. I'm an instructor, currently fourth degree black belt. And so obviously I've mastered that the best and I can teach it to other people. But it's a lifelong pursuit. So I'm still learning more. I'm still growing. But I think the difference, and I think even my older instructors would say the difference between the growth before and now is that we were kind of helping you grow, and now you're growing on your own, right? You're learning your own pathways and your own likes and dislikes, and you're creating your own way of Aikido. And I think that's a really important path. It's a really cool path in my opinion. Because I think when you're starting out as like a first degree, second degree black belt, you're trying to maintain the status quo by doing what everybody else is doing, but trying to do it better. And I think that's a totally path you have to go through, is to kind of copy other people and do it, as fast or as hard, or if not harder than the other person. And then I think at some point you kind of get out of that and go, you know what, I'm going to do this my own way. The way I feel more comfortable moving, the way that tunes in with my body more. And that also includes cross training, right? Cross training means you're finding a different way to move that you enjoy, you know? And I think me personally, I love the engagement, I love the entanglement, and that really leads me to other martial arts. But I think the prime one that I'm a totally white belt learning from the beginning is Gracie Jiu Jitsu. I'm actually doing the Gracie Combatives, doing the online course, training with a friend. I'm doing that out of my own time, and I'm learning a quite big deal, and it's actually really helped me understand where the gaps are for Aikido, and not just technical gaps, but maybe the way I'm thinking about something. Um, Maybe I'm thinking about this in the wrong way, and I need to change the framework in which I'm looking at the problem. And I think that really helped. And I can go way deep into that hole in terms of what I was learning just out of Gracie Combatives. That really helped me understand my art, Aikido, a little bit more. But we'll probably go into that into a later video. The last one I'm going to answer real quick. I know we're going on about an hour and 10 minutes is what it's showing. So thank you for listening, by the way. But the last one is, why should I train martial arts? And I think I get this quite a bit. Um, Sometimes it alternates between why should I train in martial arts and then why should I train in Aikido? And I really think that answer has to be answered by yourself, right? You have your own motivation about why you want to do things, and you have your own interest, right? So, not all people like martial arts. Not all people like the physical contact of things. Some people just want to go to yoga, right? Some people want to go dancing. Some people just want to go to the backyard and, cut wood or whatever. All of that is okay, right? Um, and in fact, it's not like one is better than the other. And I think, so, I don't know, maybe I'm just a terrible salesman to say, I know people want to be like, you need Aikido, or you need martial arts. Um, but in reality, you can find any hobby that you want. But I think what makes Aikido unique is obviously the training method is martial arts, right? A good physical discipline, I think, is absolutely very important to everybody. I think especially right now that we're dealing with this coronavirus situation and we're reducing our social footprint, so to speak. We're not going out, we're not getting that engagement with other people. I think it's very important that you find some physical discipline you can do at home right now to keep not just your physical strength up, but your mental sanity, right? You need a mental physical discipline, right? A mind body practice. And I think that's what Aikido really excels at, it's a mind body, it tunes your mind and body together and says, hey, we're in harmony, right? So it's not just, Aikido is not just the way of harmony with other people. I think ultimately that's what it is. But at first, it's about, mind and body in harmony with yourself. And I think to me, that was the most powerful tool. The first tool that Aikido gave me was being in harmony with my own self, right? My own ego, my own harmony, my own insecurity, all that stuff. I had to be comfortable in my own skin and admit that, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm a human being and I have weaknesses and I have strengths. But it was also being comfortable with that, right? To say, these are my strengths, those are good ones. Like, physical example, I'm terrible at cardio, right? I hate cardio. But I mean, look at my body. I mean, just look at how my body's designed. I'm not designed for cardio, right? I'm designed for strength, right? Resistance, muscle, weight. And I can do that all day. I love that stuff. And so it's kind of that getting comfortable in your own skin, like, hey, dude, I'm not going to be a lightweight runner. That is a weakness. And obviously, in general sense, you need cardio, so you're going to have to keep doing it, but you don't have to like it. Just do it, get it out of the way, and then you can enjoy the hell out of weight training all you want. So I think that's that idea of you know is like figure out what you're good at and do that and enjoy it and just dive into it, but also understand what you're not good at and be comfortable in your own skin to say this is not my thing, but I recognize why I need to do it, so I'm going to keep doing it. And over time, obviously, you're going to get better, but you don't have to harp on yourself that I suck at cardio and I'm going to beat myself up about it. It's like I'm not good at it, but I'm going to keep at it and I'm going to get better, but I'm not going to harp on it, right? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to this, going out and I love weight training and physical, lifting things. I love that stuff. So I'm going to enjoy that. And I'm going to find different, ways of doing cardio that are not as painful as I need to make it, right? So one of the exercises I do, so I do physical fitness training as on top of my martial arts, which I think in terms of cross training, you should also, I think everybody should do that, right? Because martial arts doesn't really cover everything, right? You still have, philosophy, meditation, nutrition, and then you have your exercise that you need to do as well, and that really kind of wraps into the holistic training that we're going to start sharing here at Houston Aikido Foundation. Is there's a whole holistic training that's not just Aikido, but it is cross training, it is physical fitness, it is a mental training like meditation, spiritual training, nutrition, right, feeding your body the right fuel, and all that stuff. It's a holistic wrap, and so we're going to start adding those videos about ways to look at some things that you can go to, and maybe some advice on core ideas that you need to look for. But there's a whole wrap around on that one that we have to do. And honestly, that's why I think with this whole coronavirus situation is like, we have all the time in the world, for the most part. We need to start um, getting good about that. And I think that's really what I've been trying to focus on with myself. And we'll probably get into a different video again on that one as well. But nutrition has become such a key focus, especially as I've gotten older. I've definitely noticed that, like when I was younger, nutrition wasn't a factor, right? Because you just have all this energy in the world, and you're youthful, and you have all your, you know, your you know energy and strength and all that other stuff, and you can just eat terrible and not notice a thing. But there's mood, there's hormones, there's maximizing efficiency, all that other stuff. And I think as you get older, you realize that you have to put more time and focus on that one. You're not going to be youthful forever. So I think a lot of that stuff, if you can, absorb some of that early on, it's going to really help you later on. And I think, I would say self-admittingly, nutrition has not been one of my strengths when I was younger. It has been, for the last, I would say 10, 15 years is something I've put more focus on. But it is something I definitely struggle with. I'm not the perfect eater or anything like that, and I'm never going to be, right? But it's about understanding, how your body reacts to different foods, what is going to be the nutrition structure that you're going to be able to do in your lifestyle, and what's going to be healthy for you, right? Beneficial for you. So all that stuff we're probably going to answer in a different video as well, is on nutrition and lifestyle. But anyways, I'm going to finish this off by just saying that thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. I think even though this coronavirus, this pandemic, has really altered, I think, just not just martial arts but life in terms of how we are living. I think, martial arts and Aikido is very much needed today. And we just have to find a different avenue, a different way to practice these things until it's safe, and maybe even after that, maybe we've realized that this kind of unlocked a gap on, most of our training is person to person in class training, but maybe we need a little bit more off the mat solo training and combine the two, right? And we're going to go through some of that too because there's a lot of great martial arts out there, like karate. Karate does a lot of solo training, right? You can have pads, you have forms, you have all this huge deck of training materials that you can do at home, and you don't have to stop training, right? You can keep going. So how can we bridge the gap? How can we get Aikido there that a lot of other martial arts have already done, especially the traditional martial arts have already done? And how do we get ourselves there? How do we set ourselves up to continue to grow and continue to develop in Aikido, both mind, body, and spirit, So anyways, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my story. If you have any questions, please let me know. But hopefully you got a little bit of insight in terms of how I think, how I've structured things, why I've structured them the way they are, and why I'm introducing certain materials into our base Aikido curriculum. I really think it's because, the way a lot of our, the kind of the general view of Aikido is that it's kind of getting lost in the art side of martial art, right? And I've had some great instructors kind of say the same thing in terms of, martial art has two words, right? Martial and art. And some people focus on the art and some focus on the martial side. And I think me as an instructor, somebody who's leading other people, I think it's best for me to make sure I paint the picture of a more balanced approach. And then obviously, if, based on your own individualized training, you find your avenue of going into one way or the other, right? Based on what you personally want to dive into. But me as an instructor and me as a person who's managing, multiple people's paths, I have to find the most, for me, it's, finding the most neutral ground and saying, you have to find balance, right? And I think that's really helped people's journeys to say, hey, maybe I really like the fight side of it, or maybe I really like the art side of it. And for me to find the balance with that really helps find the fine tuning instead of saying, hey, you're this guy who likes to do the art, you're really great at the form and flow, but your randori techniques are not so good. I'm not going to just let that be. I'm going to say, hey, you need to balance yourselves, right? Find some practical and find some art into this, right? And likewise the other way, if somebody's purely into the fight mode, purely into the survival, and just do the technique, the other side, I got to say, calm down, be smoother, think longer, all that stuff. Think about the art of this thing as well, you know. And then obviously within that struggle of primal and art, you're going to find you're going to unlock something, in my opinion. So I think that's really been my teaching methodology, and I've really seen some great results in people, and great watching students start from white belt to second, third degree black belt, and watching the path that they're taking, and that path has been very similar, right? People who struggle with fighting with other people have transformed themselves into people to a person who wants to get along with other people, or maybe even the opposite. Maybe somebody who was very uncomfortable engaging with other people is now very confident in engaging with other people, and not in being totally comfortable in conflict and being able to find the solution in there. Both of those ways, for me, is watching somebody grow, into something that's their own, and then having these people get into the art, not only unlock, parts of their personality and the training itself, but finding their own Aikido and what does that look like, has been an incredible journey, and it's not even over, right? It's still going. So I think that's the path that I think Aikido offers, comparatively to a lot of other martial arts, and not in a negative way. It's just that Aikido, I think the philosophy allows those avenues for people to explore who they are and what that looks like, and it allows growth and harmony, right? And to blend and to flow. with whatever's going on, right? So, anyways, thank you for listening. Hopefully, you gleaned something off of this. You got to know me a little bit better. I am going to be posting some more materials on not just kind of the philosophical background of things, but we're also going to be looking at some training materials, adding some different elements of cross training that I've been able to do and been able to find some benefit in, and then find the whole wraparound on a holistic approach to not just martial arts, but to a lifestyle, and understanding avenues of here's what I've learned, here's my experience, and then finding our pathway in this current coronavirus situation, using online materials, sharing content with the world, and also, anybody out there who can contribute to the Patreon page, help us continue to provide more materials, help us stay afloat, and that's really the truth about it. Is obviously we haven't been able to train anybody since March, April. So being able to maintain the facilities that we built, and maintaining the website, maintaining some marketing materials, maintaining training tools, providing that content, and letting that content keep going. It's really the most important thing to me because I think martial art has so many different benefits that I've experienced in my lifetime. And hopefully you can find some experience and benefit into it too. So thank you for listening. We will see you on the next one.